He might well pull out of NATO.
I don't think that's likely to be the case.
What did you make of that poll then? Reform is projected to cost the Conservatives 96 seats. So the argument that you'll be hearing all the time is that Tories need to turn right in order to deal with reform. Do you accept that?
No, I think that rather than turning right, we need to stick to the right course, and that's the one that we're on. People can look at maps in the Daily Telegraph or other newspapers of what the next election might look like, but what's more important is that we have a route map to make the country stronger, and we're already making progress. We're already seeing that, for example, inflation, which is the thief of people's labour, the biggest tax of all, has been cut from 11.1% to 3.9%. So we need to stick to this route
But
map.
not by you, but by circumstance.
Well, it was certainly
by the Bank of England.
It's certainly the case that the economic policies that we have been following under Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have created the circumstances which have allowed us not just to bear down on inflation as part of our route map to a brighter future, but it is also the case that we've been able to cut taxes as well. So just earlier this month, anyone who's on an average salary, £35,000, is now £450 a year better off as a result of the decisions that we've made. And governments, understandably, have economic woes laid at their door, even when sometimes there are global factors in play. But governments can chart that course. They can follow that route map, and that's what we've been doing because we have a plan for how we can make sure that things continue to improve in this country. And Labour have no map, no moral compass, no way of navigating the very difficult waters that we're going through at the moment.
Do you think people are not going to listen to you, though? Because although you might have cut tax in that respect, you've been responsible for raising taxes. You've been in power for 14 years. There comes a point, Michael Gove, you'll know this, political gravity is undefeated. And you've got to try and make a case that 14 years is not too long and you still deserve another chance. You talk about your plan. We've had Mel Stride on talking about a plan. But you should have had a plan for 14 years, and people may have stopped listening to you.
I don't think that's true, because come the election, there'll be a straightforward choice. And if we look back at those 14 years, there's a lot that Conservatives can be proud of. You'd expect me to say, but it is true that, for example, in education, we implemented a plan when we came into office in 2010 to improve our schools. And we've seen the results of that plan working, with our children in England being the fourth best readers in the world, the best readers in the Western world. We've seen more schools that are good and outstanding. We've seen more children from disadvantaged backgrounds going on to university. And that's as a result of sticking with a clear plan, going through with reform, sometimes in the teeth of opposition. We're seeing the same happen now with our economic plan, and we're also going to see the same happen with our approach towards migration. Because, again, in the last year, we've seen the number of illegal crossings down by a third.
Having been very high under your watch.
Oh, sure. But overall...
You can't keep relying on your bad record to say that your record now is better. That's the intellectual problem you have here, Michael. You're doing a very good job of it, but that's the argument that you're making. Like, look at our bad record. It's a slightly better record now. That's still your bad record.
Life throws challenges at all governments. And the test is, how has a government responded? Has it met and mastered that challenge? And then the next test is there a reason to opt for an untried, untested alternative, particularly when on the essential questions they don't have answers? So the biggest thing that Labour are promising is £28 billion of extra investment. Keir Starmer was asked about it by Laura Kuenssberg on Sunday. He affirmed that's what he wanted to do, but there's no detail. There's no explanation as to where that money is coming from. So the conclusion is either that he's going to borrow more, which puts up interest rates, which costs more for people on mortgages, or he's going to tax more. And the question again is, who is he going to hit with those taxes? Unless and until he explains that, then what we have is our route map to a better future, and then Labour with no plan at all.
OK, Michael, now, many Conservative MPs who come on this programme say exactly that, and I understand that there's a clear message, and that is that Labour don't have a plan, we have a clear plan.
Yes.
Perception is also incredibly important. And you're a politician. The people that listen to this programme are not politicians, but they are, you serve them. Phil in Cambridge is someone who gets in touch with us quite a lot, and he's talking about his perception. Can you please ask Michael Gove if he understands, not necessarily that you accept, but if you understand that your government has broken everything? Courts, hospitals, schools, I know you mentioned schools, roads, housing, the cost of living, etc. Is that can you understand that perception even?
Yes, I can, because people have been suffering, and I think Phil and others would appreciate. They might, come to different conclusions about where responsibility lies, but they would appreciate that the COVID pandemic and war in Ukraine, and indeed the conflict that we currently have in the Red Sea, create testing circumstances for any government. But I challenge the idea that this government has broken things in the way that he mentions. I talked about schools, but I think it's also the case that with respect to the NHS, in those weeks when we don't have strikes, and we can argue about the pros and cons of the BMA's position if you'd like, but when we don't have strikes, we're seeing consistent pressure downwards on waiting lists, and we're seeing significant investment in the NHS, and there are new hospitals that are being built and a workforce plan, which means that for the first time in decades, we have a trajectory of new doctors and nurses.
Okay, but the problem is that you have perception on one side, and then you have that huge poll yesterday, and Grant Shapps came on and said, "Oh, the only poll that matters is the poll on election day." But if the perception feeds into how many people are actually going to vote for you, and it looks like, based on that poll, not many are, and you are going to face a 1997 style wipeout, then clearly that perception is winning.
No, I think that you can trick yourself into a cycle of despair if you believe that a self-fulfilling prophecy, which political commentators and others want to push, will necessarily come to the conclusion that you point out. But as politicians, we're not commentators, we're actors. We have a responsibility to deliver and a responsibility to ensure that people listen to our arguments rather than the arguments of others. And in particular, in an election year, we have a responsibility to say it's a choice. And there are perceptions about Labour, about Keir Starmer, about his lack of backbone and principle, about the unwillingness on his part to spell out what Labour would do in office, that I would argue mean that Labour, very, very far from being as competitive as some would argue, is still in the minds of many people in this country an unknown and potentially very risky quantity.
Okay, we want to move on, but just finally on this issue, are you going to stand as the MP for Surrey Heath at the next election?
Oh, yes.
Just checking.
And you don't mind being in opposition?
Well, I've been in opposition before, but I'm pretty confident that this time we will be putting pressure on Labour to say what it is that they would do differently and better. And I will also be able to show that the steps that we've been taking since Rishi became Prime Minister have enabled us to deal with the big economic challenges.
And you've made that point. Let's talk about Donald Trump. What do you make of Donald Trump? You've interviewed him for The Times.
I have. I interviewed him for The Times just after he was elected for the first time, but before he was inaugurated. He's, again, unique, a force of nature. My words, I think, I don't know if they stand the test of time, but they speak for themselves in that when you meet him, there's just a torrential flow of conversation. And he has this, as I say, almost, he's like the sort of the biggest primate in the room, in any room. But, again, I wrote that as a reporter, telling it like it looked to me, seeing it as I saw it, as a politician, then it's incumbent on all of us, whoever the President of the United States is, to make that relationship work. Much as
But
we
is he
have
dangerous?
to do.
What if he pulls
Much as we
out
have
of
to deal with everyone.
Well, he might pull out of NATO. He might well pull out of NATO.
I don't think that's likely to be the case. However, whoever the American people choose as their president, and it is their choice, we have a responsibility to work with them, because the relationship that we have with the United States in defence, intelligence, security, and economically is so important. So any British Prime Minister has to make a judgment about what's best for the people of the United Kingdom. And Rishi Sunak has shown that he can work with a Democrat president in the United States very effectively, as we saw at the weekend in the Red Sea, and that he can also work with European leaders from the whole spectrum of political opinion.
Someone says, a couple of people are concerned about Donald Trump. You have no concerns about him being president?
Well, I have concerns about the state of the world, as the Foreign Secretary pointed out at the weekend. All the lights are flashing red. But to look at just one issue or one individual and to abstract that from the sort of web of difficult decisions that any prime minister has to take, I think is a mistake. And again, Rishi has shown on the international stage, the Windsor framework, dealing with the situation in the Red Sea, supporting Zelensky in Ukraine, that he has what it takes to protect Britain's interests.
Who would you rather go for a drink with, Lee Anderson or Donald Trump?
I think Donald Trump is teetotal, so Lee.
Okay, if they were not teetotal.
A coffee then?
Yes.
I think Lee as well, actually.